Merci. I'm very grateful and honoured to have been invited to be with you this evening. A little bit intimidated and ever so slightly gobsmacked after listening to the last presentation. I'm happy to say that Tony and I went to the same school, St. Helens College in Ennis, many years ago, although I had left it before he got there. And I can tell you also that I will certainly be inviting him to Leinstall Abbey School sometime soon. I must admit I'm a little bit jealous of the people who got to speak earlier in the week. In their various ways and from their various perspectives, they've highlighted much of what has been sick in Irish society over the last century, and much of what is sick about it today. Much has been said about how our republic has been and continues to be less than it might be. And as one whose college years were spent studying Irish history, I found much of the analysis fascinating and have been following things on Twitter and on the website throughout the week, even though I only arrived in person yesterday. I promise I won't get into a row with the Minister for Education about compulsory history, not in this forum anyway. Whether we all need to learn history or not may be a moot point, but that we all need as a society to learn from history is surely beyond question. The well-known words of Maya Angelou come to mind. History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. There's certainly a need to look back and to analyse. However, after all the diagnosis, actually identifying the best treatment is a different and difficult task, and I find myself on quite uncomfortable ground, and indeed I suppose the whole week has been about trying to identify the treatment. The summer schools project for today, as set out in the programme, is a daunting one. Joe wrote, "This is a day for looking forward, for seeing how we can draw on our own resources, how we can use the wealth that is still there, including, but not only, financial wealth, to build a better republic." And Tony gave wonderful exposition of the wealth that is there. And I think that's a very important part of the discussion, and a very important complement to the more explicitly economic discussions earlier on in the day. In the midst of the social scientists and social entrepreneurs gathered on the stage this evening to explore this question, I must look like quite an unusual creature, and I'm not referring to what I'm wearing. For one thing, I'm a minister of the Roman Catholic Church, which, if we're honest, would hardly be the first organisation most Irish people would look to when it comes to rebuilding the Republic. Maureen spoke very cogently there about trust, and it isn't lost on me. Secondly, I'm a monk living in a monastery, and so in many ways I'm protected and removed from many of the challenges that face many Irish people. Thirdly, I work in and run a secondary school, which, though open to students from all religious or non-religious backgrounds, is very proud to be a Catholic school. And fourthly, the school I happen to lead is a fee-charging boarding school, and so is sometimes open to charges of elitism and privilege. And so I'm very grateful, deeply grateful, that the organisers of the summer school have seen fit to include a voice such as mine in this evening's conversation. We have a somewhat stunted political intellectual tradition in this country, public intellectual tradition in this country. As people like Olivia O'Leary sometimes remind us, this has perpetuated a poverty of civic consciousness and of public discourse, which has cost us, though, of course, the unique beast that is the Irish summer school, and particularly this summer school, are honourable exceptions to that rule. Nevertheless, Irish people have traditionally prized education very highly indeed. In all the discussions yesterday where there was a focus on education, Don Thornhill, Brian McCrath and Bridget Laffan all highlighted that very fact. Successive generations of parents have striven to provide the best possible education for their offspring, often with great personal sacrifice. I hate my job, but I do it for you and your brothers and sisters. Sadly, that education has too often functioned as a visa for foreign shores. But the high value which Irish people have traditionally attached to education still endures, and we need to continue prioritising education. There was some discontent from the floor yesterday that the focus was mainly on third-level education. And though we're all probably inclined to think that our own particular sector is the most important, and I'm no exception, I was actually more concerned and disappointed at the focus on education as the acquisition of economically useful or technical skills. In the necessary effort to climb out of our economic hole, let us not abandon altogether the idea that education is of value for its own sake. We need skills for sure, but we also need soul, wisdom, and human flourishing. We need the kind of education of the hearts to go with the education of the heads that Tony was talking about. Finland is, with almost tiresome regularity, cited in every forum as an example of an education system to be emulated. And I was gratified to hear Professor Browne OSB point out yesterday that it was precisely in response to a banking crisis and subsequent recession that the Finns chose to give priority to their education system as a pathway out of recession. An example, perhaps, of austerity not being the answer. According to a 2012 EU report on Finland, every pupil has the right to receive their education and the interpretation and assistance services, teaching and pupil welfare services, and any aids required for participation in education free of charge. That includes the school doctor, the school psychologist, the school dentist, the school therapist, and the school social health worker. In addition, textbooks and other learning materials, school transport and daily school meals, accommodation and full board for those who live long distances from school, as well as the treatment of injuries sustained in accidents at school or during travel to school, are also free of charge to all pupils. That's what a properly funded education system looks like. One where there is no difference in the resources between different types of school. The Minister for Education and Skills seems likely to continue increasing the pupil-teacher ratio in fee-charging schools, which is obviously something that concerns me. And the trajectory seems to be such that many of these schools will in time be forced either to come into the free system or to close down altogether. And I don't want to go off now on my hobby horse and abuse my position here. But I have to say that amidst all the fashionable and media-friendly arguments about elitism and equality of opportunity, the reality is missed that penalising those who choose to send their children to particular schools does not actually provide a tide to lift the boats of the majority in other schools. Talking about the funding of fee-charging schools also diverts attention away from the inequality of funding in second-level education generally. Government funding for non-fee-paying voluntary secondary schools, like the one that Tony and I attended, is approximately €90 per student lower than in community schools per year, and €200 lower than in vocational schools. This is iniquitous, but merits very scarce mention in our political discourse. The Minister admitted here yesterday that the greatest problems in education are at second level. Well, taking money out of the system to make an ideological point is pure folly. It's that race to the bottom that people sometimes speak about, or to quote a phrase used by Browne OSB, a slide into mediocrity. It's about the equalisation of under-resourcing. The reality is that our education system is underfunded and is at breaking point. Classes are getting bigger and requirements such as post-responsibility, learning support, special needs assistance, guidance counselling and so on are being cut all the time. That cannot continue if we are to transform the educational experience for our young people. A transformation to which the Minister is himself clearly personally committed and for which he should be commended. Much is being reformed and many initiatives are being rolled out. Too many at the same time, perhaps. There's a danger with all the reform, most of which is welcome, that teaching and learning, which Bridget Laffan didn't like the sound of yesterday, and still more creativity and enterprise will actually be drowned out in a tide of forms, reports and compliance requirements. Underfunding and over-regulation is an unpleasant cocktail. I was relieved to hear yesterday that progress will soon be made on reforming the CAO point system, which, though neutral and objective, does have the effect of making second-level schools almost like factories. Tony referred to, we've turned our students into worker ants, and it regularly feels like that. The system as we have it forces teachers to concentrate too much on exam papers and teaching to the exam, and reducing students' educational reports, their entire educational outcome, to a number, to their points tally. Some lines by a very famous Irish educationalist come to mind. Our common parlance has become impressed with the conception of education as some sort of manufacturing process, and our children are the raw material. You might be surprised to hear that text dates from over a century ago, comes from Pádraig Pearse's famous pamphlet, The Murder Machine. It's a withering and bitterly polemical work full of rancour towards England for the iniquities of the education system in Ireland. Now, I'm not going to get into trying to assess the educational system of 1912. Today is about looking forward. However, the disturbing fact is that our native education system of today is not entirely immune to the criticisms Pearse was making a century ago. Quote, "They've planned and established an education system which more wickedly does violence to the elementary human rights of Irish children than would an edict for the general castration of Irish males. The teacher has not been at liberty, and in practice is not yet at liberty, to seek to discover the individual bents of his pupils, the hidden talent that is in every normal soul, to discover which and to cherish which, that it may in the fullness of time be put to some precious use, is the primary duty of the teacher." Igniting a young person's heart, to use Tony's phrase. And so when you strip away all the anti-English polemic, that's actually not a million miles away from the contemporary second-level educational experience. And so a reform of the point system by 2016 would be a suitable centenary memorial for Pearse. The failure to fund education properly and the utilitarian way that we tend to view school as a mere means to admission to third level rather than as an important part of life itself does in fact mean that schools are frequently under such pressure that, in Pearse's phrase, the hidden talent that is in every normal soul can get missed out on. I was glad to see an article in yesterday's Irish Times calling for the teaching of philosophy in schools. Anything which would equip our students for critical thinking, but more with a love of wisdom and with tools for life, is to be welcomed and might help move us beyond that excessively utilitarian understanding of education. As a Christian educator, I can't help thinking of education as being like the raising of Lazarus in the Gospel. Jesus weeps over the death of his friend Lazarus, and then he calls into the tomb, "Lazarus, come forth." And then when Lazarus comes out of the tomb, Jesus instructs the assistants, "Unbind him, let him go free." That should be the experience of our students. Not battery chickens or cogs in the wheels of the murder machine, but precious individuals led out into the light and set free, liberated. The word education comes from the Latin educare, to lead out or to draw out from, either drawing knowledge out of the student or more, leading the student, him or herself, out of somewhere. And so Jesus drew Lazarus out of the tomb, and so in restoring him to life and in freeing him from the ties that bound him, Jesus was educating him. And I think that's a wonderful vision for education. A personal call, drawing a student out from the tomb of death into the light of life, igniting their imagination, allowing them the freedom to dream their dreams. I also want to suggest very strongly, and I suppose I would, wouldn't I, that faith-based schooling would be a positive, enriching and ennobling dimension to any reformed education system we may develop for our republic. I'm conscious that this is not a universally held viewpoint, and we're back at questions of trust again, and so I want to talk a bit more about it. In doing so, I want to acknowledge the painful and scarring experiences which many people have had in church-run schools and express my sorrow over them. Yet in spite of them, I passionately believe that faith-based education, and in my own case, Catholic education, should not just be tolerated as a sort of a historical hangover, but should be celebrated and encouraged. Getting back to the values of the un-PC values of the signatories. The theologian Jerry O'Hanlon begins his book on theology in the Irish public square with somewhat of an understatement, probably the understatement of the century. He says, "The voice of religion, in particular that of the clerical Roman Catholic tradition, has often been experienced in Irish public life as authoritarian and harsh. Little wonder then, especially in the context of the significant erosion of authority of the Catholic Church in Ireland due to the child sexual abuse scandals, that there is scant evidence nowadays of nostalgia for those days when religion played a significant role in public discourse. It's certainly right that the days of crypto-Rome rule, or Drumcondra rule perhaps, are gone, and that our society has become more open, pluralistic and cosmopolitan. Yet there are those whose cosmopolitanism seems to be open to pretty much everything except religion. Quoting Jerry O'Hanlon again, "There is a postmodern toleration of religion in the private sphere but considerable suspicion of any attempt to bring a critique to bear on public life from a religious perspective. There's a maxim from another era often associated with Jesuit schools, which I want to mention. There are various versions of it, but the simplest is, "Give me the boy, and I'll give you the man." Though once a proud summary of a particular vision of education and formation for life, it's now more often seen in a negative or pejorative sense. Some would now understand it as suggesting that Catholic education is some kind of nefarious and underhand exercise in brainwashing and mind control. And while many people are now rightly seeking more pluralistic patterns of patronage, particularly in primary schools, in some quarters the pendulum is swinging further, almost to the point of suggesting that a faith-based school is an inherently bad thing. A few days ago here, Deputy Aodhán Riordan suggested that we have a segregated education system in the Republic, and I think that is not a reality. We certainly have faith-based, but the idea of segregation, as if we were kind of keeping people apart on religious grounds, just isn't true. He went on to argue that we've allowed a situation to evolve where the determining ethos governing the vast bulk of our state-funded schools is a religious one. We've outsourced education to patron bodies who continue to have a huge influence over the manner in which our children are educated. He doesn't say so outright, but it's clear that he doesn't have much time for the religious ethos of schools. But there's nothing unusual in having church-run, state-funded education. Even in uber-liberal Holland, something like 60% of state-funded primary schools are church-run. In the laudable project of ensuring more pluralistic structures and service provision in our new republic, we need to make sure that we don't slide into an illiberal, totalitarian kind of state regulation and ownership. Jerry O'Hanlon suggests perhaps it's a good moment at this time of national and global crisis to re-examine the possibility that a non-fundamentalist religious voice may have significant wisdom to contribute to public discourse. I agree. And I gently suggest too that now is also a good moment to affirm that non-fundamentalist Christian and Catholic education have significant wisdom to contribute to the building up of our society. They're part of the non-financial wealth we already have, which the Director has charged us with highlighting tonight. Catholic schools have a particular vision, and at a time of crisis and insecurity, vision is a key resource. I am about to finish, Chairperson, I promise you. Dermot Lane has written that the Church is committed to education in virtue of her conviction that the gospel of Christ is a living reality which frees and liberates, heals and saves, reconciles and transforms human beings. And that's the kind of school I would wish for anyone I loved. And that's the kind of community which I and my colleagues in my own school and in countless other Christian schools around the country are trying to bring to life. In spite of the external pressures, in spite of scarce resources, in spite of the burden of our sometimes dark history, in spite of increasing administrative demands, in spite of human weakness and sinfulness, in spite of the seeming commodification of education, in spite of any number of other factors that pull us down, we believe that we have something to offer and which can be improved all the time and which will help reconstruct a healthy society. Schooling that honours the individual as a child of God, made in his image, that calls and enables students to belong to a community of learning and exploration, that equips them for living as well as for college or work, and that, as in the case of Lazarus, gives them life, unbinds them, and sets them free. Come on,